So, welcome to Bloom. Be inspired to be an empowered version of yourself and create meaningful change. And my guest today is Alyssa Wolf, which I think is particularly impressive because she handles 5 children, homeschooling, and a successful business. And today we're going to dive into the complexities of this and how Alyssa unraveled this situation for herself, keeps a sound mind, a healthy heart, and a balanced life. So, Alyssa, you are the founder of a business called Unbusy, which I really like because in a way it already points at the core of your work. And I would really like for you to introduce yourself and what you would like this audience to know about you and your work.
Thank you, Yole. Well, I'm a take your time back coach for moms who are working from home because as an HSP, I do not like living with stress. It's not good for the nervous system. So I set up my life in a way that gets rid of the frazzle for me. And I realized HSP or not, all the moms around me were living with that kind of frazzle. And I decided if I don't need to with 5 kids, they definitely don't need to with two. And then stacking a business on top of that, of course, adds more
Mm.
complexity. So I wanted to change the lives of other women and their lived experience in life.
And when we had our first conversation, we both realized that we are both deeply introvert. So in the discussion, there were quite a lot of pauses that other people would have been deeply uncomfortable with, but we were not. So this is going to be an interesting conversation regarding that aspect. So how would you say did that introversion um, color your decisions? I know that, your kids are at home a lot, you work online from home. Would you say that it has to do with your being an HSP and an introvert or rather not?
Yes, it does, because I didn't want to deal with the commute. I don't really like doing errands and trips outside the house. I don't even like driving much. So to me, I want the home environment to be as well suited, nice, unstressful as possible. And then I just like staying there most of the week, honestly.
Would you say, I mean, I find this really interesting because a lot of us think that if they organize their lives like that, there's actually something wrong with them because they don't like going out. And, if you have 5 kids and you don't like to drive a car, that can pose a problem. But what I hear from you is that you simply took that decision to rearrange things your way, the way you are comfortable with life, rather than saying, I'm hiding from life and I can't cope with life. And could you expand on that a bit?
Yes. Well, I think my parents set a good foundation for me because I didn't realize that growing up, but all of us were introverts. So my parents, a sibling, and we didn't go outside the home a great deal as kids. So we had our permitted activities for extracurriculars, but our parents usually made us justify if we wanted to add a new one and asked if which one we were going to drop to make room for that. And
Uh-huh.
it was clear to them that it was stressful to have to drive us out in the evening when there was something else they would rather do. So I thought that was normal, I guess, as from a parental perspective, that a bunch of kid activities would be draining for the parent. And then when it was my turn, I mean, when you have babies, you don't have to take them outside the house. So, of course, I didn't want to. In the US, we have like library hours or music things you can take your tiny children to. I'm not sure how much good they get out of that, honestly. I think
Mm.
it's more that the women want to get out of the house. And since that wasn't my perspective, I never started. So, our kids didn't grow up being used to being out of the house except to go visit grandma and grandpa type of a thing.
Would you I well, let's segue a little bit into something else we talked about, and that is the spectrum of sensitivity and the variety that exists within that spectrum. And you having 5 children, yourself being an HSP. Now, I don't know about your partner, we talked about the fact that that adds, quite a layer of complexity or, maybe also fun and interest. Could you take us a little bit in that sense on how you, before we dive into your business things, how you sort of structure your day and stay sane with, everybody having their own demands or things that they need in order to be happy and fulfilled?
Sure. So yes, first off, my husband is an HSP, I would say much more strongly than I am myself.
Mm.
So I have a bit of flex. He doesn't have a great deal of bandwidth for flex. And
Mhm.
then having a job to commute to and having 5 children kind of uses up most of that. So for me, in large part, when the kids were younger, I could just structure the home according to my needs because my oldest was definitely falling in that HSP. So, the oldest child does tend to shape the way the siblings behave and what games he or she suggests, that kind of a thing.
Right.
And then the second is probably our most adaptable, easygoing, most bandwidth for anything. So she wasn't really someone I had to consider in terms of what does she need. If anything, she was more likely to say, let's go out and do something or play a game.
Hmm.
And then as we kept adding more kids, sometimes it takes a couple years or even close to school age for me to realize, okay, this is where you're aiming towards. It looks like you're falling more towards this side or that side of the HSP spectrum. So I wouldn't say it was till, maybe the last 5 or 10 years, really, that I felt like I had a good handle on what all 5 of my kids, because the youngest is only 5 years old,
Hmm.
were really towards. And then, for example, like, do you like to burn a candle or do you like to have lotion? Things like that.
Hmm.
I didn't even have any of those things until a few years ago. I just didn't care. So some of these things were not present at the start of our family's journey. And then when I tried some of that, like HSP, we need relaxation and scents are very important, but they're also very overpowering. And then I realized, for example, that just in the smell realm, that we have a whole bunch of, I don't know, like 3 or 4 different HSP categories, you could say, in our household, where I think there's only 3 that I like compared to what's sold in a store. It can be either very frustrating or else very overwhelming to say, I don't like anything, can't handle it. No, you may not buy me something. Don't give me this for Christmas. And some of my kids can tolerate almost anything. So they're more likely to come and say, Mommy would like to cook something. Mommy would like to light a candle. It would be fun.
Hmm.
But I may not be able to handle smelling it for a few hours. And then the third set is that we do have a couple of people who don't want any smells at all. So we have to try to do candles or lotion or certain cooking things when they're least likely to be around the kitchen or the living room. And they, in their turn, have had to learn to say, okay, I understand that the heating and cooling system in the house may carry some of that smell to my room, and I have to be okay with that. But I also recognize it will be much less in my room than elsewhere. So I'm allowed to say I don't like this, or please light it after I leave and I finish my assignment out here. Things like that. Again, it's been interesting because, of course, when I ran into the concept of HSP, I just assumed that meant every HSP had the same smell sensitivity. So this would be easy. If I could be suited, then everyone in the family would be fine, right? And
Yeah,
of course, as you know, that's not at
go
all true.
that way, even though that's how this story is usually told. But I mean, you're just like a lab. I mean, lab conditions. Yeah. So yeah, I have the same with my children who are both HSP as well. But for example, if you put me in a room with techno music, I go insane, and my son goes to a techno disco. Like you do what?
Yes, the challenge of what music to play in the evening, it is definitely a problem. Sometimes we have to balance it based off of who is in a good mood and who is not. And if they are in a good mood, they would be able to stretch themselves and listen to music that would push the noise tolerance for them without that pushing over them the edge. And if they're not in a good mood, we know you do not have bandwidth for that. We need some Beethoven. We need some classical music. No one will object to the classical.
Ah, so in a way, what you're saying is what's what saves you in a way, maybe that's not the right word, is flexibility, listening to each other, and respect.
Yes. We have been known to get out headphones and say, all right, 4 out of 5 of you HSPs have agreed to listen to the loud music this one evening, and the one person has said they will not. You may have wear headphones around the family members so that you do not have to listen to this.
That's an interesting solution. Would you say that our society is ready for that kind of interaction?
I don't think so, no, because I don't feel like being an HSP is very mainstream or talked about here for mothers or parenting, let alone the idea that you might have children who need a great deal less stimulation and how to take care of their needs. I mean, so many of our public places or our churches, the music level, the sound, the stimulation is just all too much. One time I took my children to a STEM fair for science and technology and engineering at the library, and it was full of people, noises, smells, activities, and the more sensitive ones just started huddling into kind of a little ball and saying, I can't take this. So I had to drive everyone home and then drive back with the people who felt like they had more bandwidth that day and they thought it would be interesting to encounter new things.
Mm. So, tying that back to your work, do you work primarily with sensitive women or with any client that is sort of interested in your take on how to restructure their days? I mean, tell us a little bit more about your work.
I do work with any client. I do find it interesting that so far, at least half of them are either HSP themselves or they have children with sensitivities. So they like the fact that I can understand personally what's going on for them. And I'm not just going to say, you know, go work in the coffee shop and go take your kids to the playground and all these different typical work from home hacks that might not apply to their situation.
Hmm. What, so what is your interpretation of unbusy? Because I mean, like we said, you have 5 kids and you have a thriving business and you have a husband and you have a house to take care of. So for most people, that would be overwhelmed. So just take us a little bit through your concept and how you actually, well, I would say reorganize people's lives or takes, but I don't know enough about your business. I was just really intrigued about what you told me about it. So just take us a little bit on a journey with you.
Yes, well, to me, the concept of unbusy is your mental perception of how you go through your day. Do you attack it from the sense of, I have so many things to do, I don't know whether I can fit it all in, and I feel stress and pressure? I would define that as busy. Or do you feel that there's enough time to get to everything that you need to get to? You can take care of yourself and your kids and your husband in the home and your work. It doesn't matter how long the to-do list was, but you feel solid that there is enough time. Then to me, that is being unbusy because
Mm-hmm.
you don't have that internal pressure. So what I'm doing with my clients is, yes, we are reorganizing their lives, which obviously scheduling plays a heavy part in that, both scheduling the time with their children and their husband, scheduling what time during the day you could do the housework, what time of day for business, scheduling when you're going to do the self-care to show them it will all fit. Here's how you may need to rearrange things to have it all fit. We also have to go through their to-do lists because a lot of the pressure we can put on ourselves is what is on that list of pending projects. And then, of course, we have to work on a lot of mindset of rewiring. Why do I feel stressed? Why do I feel pressured? Why do I feel like a good mother requires me to do this, and this with my children that I don't even want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I feel like I need to do those 3 projects this week? Do they need to be done this week? Like questioning almost everything. And
Mm-hmm.
then delegation, because yes, at a certain point, you physically cannot get to everything that your house and your family and your job needs from you. So, what doesn't need to be done by you? If you have your own business, of course, there's hiring out, or you could shoot for the extreme simplicity route and just not show up on certain platforms, completely ignore one part of a business quote unquote model that people think you need to have. And then on the home side, the easiest way to delegate is probably to your children as soon as they're school age, or you might hire a housekeeper or something like that. But it's primarily those three things: the scheduling, the mindset, and the delegation. And it's amazing to see the transformation in the women when they realize they don't have to carry everything. And in fact, they've been carrying far too much for too long.
Yeah, so what you describe to me is that superwoman aspect that we all try to sort of, you know, live by, that, we have to have a successful career and our children need to be able to go to music school, to hockey, to language school, to, play an instrument, whatever, this insanity of keeping our children insanely busy as well. And I see that around myself all the time, these children that are not able to concentrate or that feel desperately unhappy if they're not in the newest and best club as everybody else, and don't have the newest gadget. This unbelievable pressure on the children and the parents, or especially the mothers, to um, be the one who organizes all of it and takes the children there and holds their hands and actually gets them to be profoundly, what's the English word for that, when you always need somebody to do something for you and organize things for you, rather than saying, I'm part of this household and part of this is being, maybe cleaning something up or tidying my room or being responsible for my own schedule, which I think, especially for sensitive people, is really important because it teaches them a sense of agency. I can do this on my own.
Yes,
And
which
I
has
can be
been,
part of a team and part of the community, right?
yes, which has been very fun to watch with our most sensitive child and the sense of agency he has. It's no, he doesn't want to be helpless and in a cocoon. He wants to do things for himself to help create the world he wants for himself, to cook the food that he wants to eat when he doesn't want to eat whatever everyone else is being served, or he wants to be able to do it.
Which I think is really important, because maybe some of the listeners might have understood, what we said before about everybody being so particular about their own needs. I think there's a fine line here between becoming utterly selfish and actually being empowered within a community. And I think in a way that is a little bit also what we need to do in our society to stop going, coming out of that in heavy pressure of, or heavy weight on saying, I want everything my way and the way it fits my individuality. And to have on the other side this really, really big need for community and sharing. And we're not very good at combining the two. And I think with your family, like I said, you're a lab. You're doing a pretty good job at that, creating that fine line and making it work for everyone. And I'm sure that's a huge help for your clients as well.
Thank you, Yole.
I would like to be, in a way, you've addressed that a bit. HSPs tend towards perfectionism. And how do you include that in your work in terms of being unbusy? Because being a perfectionist can keep you busy up to insanity, right? So how do you cope with that, and how do you transport that in your work with other women?
In the work, I think it comes up with the how much is on the to-do list for that particular client, and how much is she putting on the calendar that was not, oh, I need to cook supper for my family and I need to deliver these projects to my clients. When I look at the optional, let's say, activities and ask, why is that there? And wouldn't you have a lot more white space in your schedule if it wasn't there? And then I listen to what she says
Mm-hmm.
about that. And that is where the perfectionism can come in. When we reframe that as maybe you shouldn't do that in this season. We're not saying you can never get there, never be that person or mother who takes her kids to hockey, but not right now with a newborn. Then
Mm.
she can start to let go. Like she doesn't have to rip the band-aid completely off and say, my children will never be hockey players, but she can say, right now, in these 6 months, we are not going to give them the opportunity to start playing hockey. She's not closed the door fully, but she has spoken up for herself a little bit in this season.
So in a way, what you're also addressing is that aspect of high empathy that many of us carry, where we can get completely lost in the needs and desires of our loved ones or the people around us. So speak to that a little bit. How do you, I mean, you, in a way, you mentioned it a little bit, but is that part of re-educating your clients as well?
Yes. Since I'm not a marriage and family therapist, obviously, I don't want to go too far into that, but I can at least point out to the client that it seems to me what she has clearly stated is that she knows she needs, for example, 90 minutes of personal time every day, and that this specific helping her kids with their homework and it always being late always means she only gets like the 20 minutes of personal time. I can point out this is the trend. And when she looks at that and says, oh, yes, I do realize that, that's when I can say, it seems to me it would be very helpful for you if you could get that 90 minutes back, not just have the 20 minutes. Do you think you could put something in place? Do you think you could tell your teenager that you need more notice of homework help or that they need to come to you before this time of day? Or do you think you could tell them that, maybe mommy doesn't have time for every single thing and they need to take care of it themselves? So I'm not going to walk her through that entire process, but I will suggest that there are things that need fixing about that part of it. Or she has put too much on because she's trying to cope with work and people are gone and she needs to take on some of their roles. And then she's shorted all the personal time and the family time. Again, I can say, okay, it looks like you already know what you need. You know you've overloaded yourself too much. Let me just point out that this is a choice. You could push back and tell your supervisor you can't handle everything. You could say, I need to push back the deadline on all of these projects if I'm expected to handle everything. Or you could tell your family, I need someone else to cook every night.
Hmm?
Insist on empathetically doing too much. I want you to understand that you are choosing that so that the next time you come to me and say, I'm burnt out, I have zero energy, I remind you that you looked at all the options and you said this is what you wanted. And we can change that. We can make a different choice at any point, but you're not helpless. You're not a victim. This is not circumstance. This was you choosing where to put your energy.
Yeah, which is in turn very empowering. However, it's very difficult for the people-pleasing kind of sensitive person. So I'm sure, that having support in reorganizing that and reframing it is really important because most of us can't get there on our own.
Yes, and we don't need to get there in one session either. If we spend 6 months and at the end of 6 months, the client feels empowered to actually say what she needs and stick to it, oh, great, I did my job as a coach.
I like that. The one thought I had, while preparing for this was what I saw sort of in front of myself was a huge schedule of the week with one slot after the next. Just like it could look like something for an automaton, like a robot. This is a slot and the next slot and the next slot. And that to me seemed utterly overwhelming to the kind of person that I am. How do you how do you make room for flexibility? because I think we're all human, breathing human beings that live with other human beings that can be chaotic, and having to stick to a very stern schedule, I think, can also be a lot of stress. How would you respond to a person like me?
My favorite trick for this, and I use it myself, is to literally put a block in the calendar, an appreciable time length that says overflow.
Mm.
That is for all of the chaos to go into, or that is for you to say, I had to handle the urgent thing earlier in the day and I need to bump my own personal projects down. Just don't schedule the day so full that you have no margin. Put
Mm-hmm.
that margin time block every single day. Or if you have very little going on, maybe once a week. But most women I find every day, or at the very least every other day, is really what's necessary. And then it shouldn't be a 20-minute time block. You need something more like an hour.
Yeah, yes, I agree with you. And the very important distinction between urgent and important, and then obviously not important. And to to I know I find that is something that goes missing so many times. You have urgent, important, not so important, but very few people have a task that's called joyful. And being sensitives, especially the introvert ones, we need that time off. We need joyful things to feed our soul, whether it's, standing in your garden, watching a butterfly going from flower to flower, or listening to music that just pleases you, or doing yoga or whatever else. And I always find that difficult when it is sort of also labeled as a task. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, so how would you bring that across to your clients, that distinction between joyful and yet another task?
When they tell me that they don't have a hobby or that workout and movement time, it just feels like another should on their plate. That's when I know we have a lot of deconstructing to do, and they are probably feeling overpressured in many areas of their life. They
Mm-hmm.
need a kind of extended breathing, time to decompress, time to get rid of a lot of the things on their plate. Because I want you to have the personal time that you can spend, 2 hours a day, gardening, knitting, baking, like whatever
Mm-hmm.
sounds fun. But if it's gotten to the level it feels like this is another habit, this is part of the perfect me,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's usually my first signal to suggest, well, why don't we just not do that? Yes, you should lose weight, but let's skip the workouts. You're not in a good frame of mind. This is not going to help you internally. Let's wait until you actually want to do yoga or go for a
Mm-hmm.
walk around the neighborhood. What would you rather do instead? I would rather her be mentally filled up, cheerful, joyful than hitting all those perfect woman, perfect wife, perfect mother markers.
Mm. Yeah, and all those um, goals that we set for ourselves to compensate for low self-worth. If I lose that weight, or if I learn to play that instrument, or if I don't know, whatever else, we sort of convince ourselves, and then our life will be worthwhile, or we will like ourselves, or we will be liked by others. And in that context, I really like, the quote you gave me, because I always ask for a quote, and that is, build a life you don't need a vacation from, which is, it's a radical change in perspective. We've all heard something similar like that, but I mean, if you really, really think about what that means that you have your day-to-day life is something you don't want to run away from all the time. And so few of us manage that. And if we think we're only, on this planet, if we're lucky, for 80 or 85 years, um, it's really, we all need that shift in perspective. What's the life I really want? what's the life that makes me expand, gives me feelings of expansion, or that one wants to live. Yeah, I don't want to achieve my life. I keep saying that HSPs are not made for data points. We are even more sensual and more feeling beings than the rest of humanity. And if we get stuck in data points and tasks, we lose what's most precious about us. Would you agree with that?
I would, yes. It's not to discount whatever drive you have, whatever your mission in the world is, but you can't become a robot.
Yeah. Yeah, especially not sensitives. Definitely not. We get really sick if we try to. Yes. I know that you have a podcast or several podcasts, right? Would you care to explain a bit what that's all about?
Yes, my main show is called The Unbusy Mom. Since I'm speaking directly to women, and of course, I want you to feel that unbusy life that you don't need the vacation from.
Mm-hmm.
And then from time to time, I will put out other audio feeds of a limited number of episodes.
Mm-hmm. So, but you have several ones and several topics. Did I understand that correctly? You sort of split them up.
Yes. So for example, one was my best work-life balance hacks
Mm-hmm.
for busy moms because I wanted a starter resource for women who are maybe new to the idea of working from home but not feeling stressed out handling it all. So I collected a few episodes on that.
Mm-hmm.
I have some that were on the first three places in your schedule I would look if I wanted to free up 15 hours in your week, because they are specific steps I would take a client of mine through. And if you want to do it yourself for your own schedule, absolutely. Like, here's the blueprint for you.
Mm-hmm. So I recommend, whoever is struggling with any of those things to actually listen to your podcast and get some advice. There's another question that came up while I was preparing for this, and that is, since you are, a strong introvert, how did you cope, or how did you get yourself to acquire clients? Because that necessitates a lot of things that are not necessarily natural to introverts. Could you share that with us?
Yes. And I would agree, it's not maybe natural, but I also have a strong value around growth. I
Mm-hmm.
never want to be stagnant. So, this whole challenge of taking on a business in addition to mothering has been a huge push for me to level up personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so each piece of that, especially around getting clients, I usually took as a challenge to say, well, at least let me learn how to do this. And if I say this is not HSP aligned, I don't have to afterwards, but I am smart, I am capable, I am empowered. I can learn how this is done and then make up my mind afterwards. And then afterwards, maybe I decide, I don't think YouTube lives are a good way to get clients, but
Mm-hmm.
I know how to hold a YouTube live. Or perhaps I decide DM conversations actually work really well because as an HSP, I enjoy human to human connection. I just don't like the idea of doing that from a stage. But
Mm-hmm.
I very much like the small group or the one-on-one situation. And there are so many ways you can attract clients when you're doing it in one-on-one. Even picking podcasting, perhaps, versus doing live webinars every week. To me, a live webinar, you are holding a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Podcasting, you're speaking to the microphone in your room by yourself. It's hard to get more HSP than that. You can control exactly what stimuli are around you. And if it wasn't a good day, well, then you didn't record that day. You can always pick when you need to be ahead and have something ready so that you're never, oh shoot, I got sick, I couldn't do it. No, you had an episode ready to go. I find a lot of ways around it, I guess, that yes, you challenge yourself, but all of business is stretching and challenging. So I don't think the getting clients part is more difficult for an HSP, if that makes sense. You just need to pick a strategy that aligns better. And there are so many to choose from. You will find those.
Mm. And be creative with it, because that's in a way what what you're saying is that you adapted the strategy to what you are comfortable with while expanding your capacity or your capability. And I really like that you say, I'm going to learn it and then I'm going to try whether it suits me or it suits the clients that I want to find as well, rather than sort of retreating into, oh, that's not for me, I'm not even going to try.
Mhm.
To have that courage or self-respect, actually, to say, well, I'm going to look at it and then try and then decide. That's good. I like that strategy. I think it's something I followed as well, but I would not have. I think I followed it unconsciously. So my last question is always, what do you think is important for our listeners that I have not asked you?
I think especially for HSP listeners, we have lots of triggers, and we're aware of that, but what triggers have you been putting up with in your daily life? I want you to just pick one of them and stop putting up with it. Maybe there's way too much noise around supper time. Maybe you're getting constantly cut off in your own personal time. But whatever it is, whether it's, the loudness, you really want someone else to deal with the raw meat, you just can't stand touching it. Please honor yourself enough this week to say, I'm not going to do that anymore, and brainstorm 4 different ways you could avoid doing that. And then pick one of them. Just try it. It doesn't have to be the right one. You try all 4 of them, try something different, but let yourself have the peace of not dealing with that trigger anymore.
Yes, I like that a lot. So in a way, getting unstuck and allowing yourself a healthy boundaries without aggression. Yeah.
Yes.
And allowing yourself not to have to be perfect about it the first time. I like that you said, well, come up with 4 and try them all 4 and see which one suits. So we leave you with this advice and with knowing that there are options about organizing your life and the needs of yourself and everybody else around you. And thank you, Alyssa, for taking the time.
You're so welcome, Yole.